Welcome to the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome to the podcast, episode 26, Cataloochee, part 2. But first, what's going on in my world? Well, unfortunately, my camera, my beloved 1D Mark II, has finally bit the dust. It has breathed its last. It has fired its last shutter. It is no more. You know, it was just one of these things where I was photographing my daughter's soccer game after going to Cataloochee, and the lens got stuck on. I tried to fix it. It just became a nightmare trying to fix it. It's not worth the money to get it fixed properly, and so, you know, you win some, you lose some. You know, in this case, I mean, I think I got my money's worth out of that camera. It was a very good camera, a good quality camera. I still recommend that 1D Mark II for people that are extremely budget minded and want a good birding camera. I still recommend it. The downside is it's only an 8 megapixel camera, and that's, in today's world, that's a very low megapixel camera. But anyway, that's that. I'm probably going to have to replace it soon. I wasn't even saving up money really for a new camera, and I still have my 7D, but you know, that camera filled the role of being my birds in flight camera, and among other things, it was just a really good action camera. But in other news, I have introduced a second podcast, I guess, I don't want to say genre, but a second podcast that is coming out on the second week and the fourth week of each month. And it's called Behind the Shot. It's still, you know, it's basically still the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, but it's a special episode on the second and fourth weeks to fill in and keep us all engaged, you know, keep me engaged with you, keep you engaged with me, and also hopefully, you know, share some of my photographs, how I took the photograph, and, you know, kind of give hints and tips. It's designed to be kind of a faster format. It's designed to be no longer than 15 minutes. And so it's a sharp contrast to my regular podcast, which is, you know, sometimes up around an hour. So hopefully it'll kind of be a good blend. So if you want to just get a quick tidbit of information, then, you know, by all means tune into the Behind the Shot. You know, if you want more in-depth thoughts and coverage and reviews and things like that, then, you know, my main podcast episodes will also still be going. So just a quick news flash on that. My trip to Shenandoah National Park, I had to cancel it, unfortunately. So another downer for me. Just too much going on in my personal life right now. And the 1D Mark II going down, it just didn't seem like a good time to make the trip. So the white-tailed deer trip is off. I am planning a trip to the Poquoson National Wildlife Refuge in probably around January to photograph the snow geese and waterfowl and so forth wintering there. Now, one thing about Poquoson that's a real problem is they have closed down a lot of the refuge to photographers, unfortunately, and it's just a sad fact or sad reality in the photographic world today, that because there are so many photographers and many of those photographers are nefarious, unfortunately they've had to close down large portions of it. And, you know, I'm not going to stand in judgment one way or the other. I know that there are a few people out there that are giving us a bad name, and that's unfortunate. But please, if you're a wildlife photographer, please do your best to at least not abuse the system and, don't be going out into the fields and flushing the birds on purpose so you can get shots and things like that. Even though you're probably not really harming the bird, it makes a lot of people upset. And, right now we need to be very careful about how we present ourselves and how we are photographing the wildlife. I am one that does not believe in over-pressuring the bird. In other words, if the bird is overly uncomfortable, then you probably need to back off a little bit. You probably need to think about maybe getting into a blind or just, you got to just use your head is all I'm trying to say. And so, unfortunately, Poquoson is becoming a place that we can't get the shots that we used to get. So I'll try to keep you posted on that. Probably we'll do a podcast episode on that later on in the early 2017. Other than that, I really don't know what's going to happen. It's just a weird, when you lose a camera, it's kind of weird, but when you lose a camera, it kind of upsets your planning. It throws a wrench in the works. It makes you kind of a little bit negative. I mean, like I said, I still have my Canon 7D, although I gotta be honest, it's been acting a little weird lately itself with the shutter, and so I could be looking at a bad shutter on that camera. So things could be better. So let's move on to in the news. What's going on in the news right now? I kind of searched around looking for an interesting news item. I didn't find a whole lot. What I did find was that Canon is going to release the 6D Mark II sometime in early 2017, maybe mid 2017. What we're expecting there is from all indications, according to Canon rumors and so forth, we're expecting a 24 to 25 megapixel full frame sensor, dual pixel AF, a tilting touchscreen, a new AF system, possibly a 19-point AF system. We're looking at maybe near-field communication, Wi-Fi, and GPS. Unfortunately, the video is probably only going to be 1080 at 60p. So for those that want a 4K video option upgrade for their 6D, you're out of luck. Now, I have shot with the 6D, and I feel like it's a great camera. I feel like the sensor is amazing. Is it a good wildlife camera, a nature camera? Yes and no. If you are going to be shooting landscapes, awesome landscape camera. If you're going to be shooting macro, awesome macro camera. If you're going to be shooting astrophotography, awesome astrophotography camera. If you're going to be shooting birds in flight, no. I believe the 6D is 3 frames a second. So I'm not expecting a whole lot more out of the 6D Mark II. Maybe they'll get you up to 5 frames. Is it doable? Yeah, it's doable. The autofocus system is not really designed, in my mind, for birds in flight and fast action. But for a low light astro camera or landscape camera, it's a great deal, a great bargain. I think they're coming in under $1,000 now, so on the used market. So yeah, if you're a landscape guy, I see no reason. If you're a landscape guy, I really don't see any reason to even buy a 5D Mark III or 5D Mark IV. I really don't, unless you're into video or something like that. But if you're just a stills guy, if I was a stills guy and I just wanted to pick up a full frame camera, inexpensive full frame camera, I'd go with a 6D. Okay, so let's move on to the meat of this episode, the trip to Cataloochee. Cataloochee, if you follow me, this is my second time there this year, and Cataloochee is located in the Great Smoky Mountains on the North Carolina side. So it's in western North Carolina along the Appalachian Mountains. It's actually right in the Appalachian Mountains. It's just north. I believe it's just north of Maggie Valley and just east of the Cherokee reservation / city area. It is a place where you can find wild elk, and it's one of the few places on the East Coast that you can find wild elk. Certainly, there are other places. One of them, Pennsylvania, actually has a place, I'm told, where they have introduced the wild elk, and I believe they're introducing them also in West Virginia. So if you're in either of those locations, you might want to do some Googling on it. I was going to research it. I totally forgot. I apologize. But I would look in those two states for possibilities. If anybody else knows of any wild elk areas in the eastern United States, feel free to email me. I'd love to hear about it. And I'd love to hear, what kind of opportunities are there. So how do you get into it? This is one thing I kind of wanted to talk about briefly. Because if you are someone that is nervous, or you have a spouse or family member that's nervous about heights or really windy, bumpy dirt roads, you really don't want to take them with you to Cataloochee. Because Cataloochee is, once you get off 40, Interstate 40, you basically exit. You go a little ways on some asphalt roads, but then eventually you start ascending the mountain pass, and it's about a 10 to 11 mile dirt road with very ruddy at certain times of the year. It can be dangerous with ice. It's a very narrow road. In some places, only one car may pass at a time. Definitely would not want to take any large vehicles there, although I have seen people drive horse trailers through there, which is frankly astounding. I don't know how. I wouldn't even dare to do that, to be honest with you. I guess I'm kind of a wimp. I don't know. But that pass alone is enough to scare someone that's not used to that type of thing. So that's one word of caution. I always mention that because I think it's important. The other thing I want to mention is that I did a short video, not a professional quality video or anything. I just did a video of my trip into Cataloochee on this last trip, and that's on my YouTube site. I will link to that in the show notes, so go ahead and check that out. But other than that, the valley itself is about a 2 mile. I think it's about 2 to 3 miles long, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's a very short valley. It's not a loop. Some people are really used to loops where you drive in and you drive around a big loop and you just keep going around in circles. That is not the case here. It is one road, and you have to allow for traffic to get through. If someone's coming toward you, you need to pull off a little bit and let them pass. Very, old school dirt roads, some paved roads, but mostly dirt. There are some other interesting things there. There's a church there you can photograph. There are turkeys there in a great number. There are black bear there, which we actually did see a black bear at a distance, so they're there. But primarily people go there to see the elk. And the elk were introduced to Cataloochee somewhere around, I believe it was 2003-ish. A small herd was introduced there, and they have grown and grown and grown, and now they're really all over the Cherokee Great Smoky Mountains National Park area, and they continue to grow. And I think, I could be wrong about this, but I'm almost positive that North Carolina even has a small hunting season now to keep their populations down. So they're doing very, very well here, and I'm very happy about that. I'm extremely happy about it, because if they hadn't reintroduced the elk into the eastern forests, we would have to drive to Montana or somewhere. I think Kentucky has a population as well, but we would have to drive to get there. And I applaud the National Park Service for doing this. I believe in the National Park Service. I think they're doing a good thing for us, and this is a perfect example. So what I wanted to do, I just wanted to take my photographs that I took. This was only a day trip. This was not a weekend trip. And I just want to take my photographs and go through them with you and kind of explain how I took them, the specs and all, and so on and so forth. So there's actually a link in the show notes called Follow Along Images. Just click on that link. It takes you to my Flickr page, and we can go through each one of these. I guess we'll start with the best. We'll start with the image that I think was the best image of the day. The first image there, it's called Bull Elk. This was an image that was taken fairly early in the morning. I think it was around, I don't know if I have the time on here or not, but I believe it was around 9 o'clock-ish, 8 o'clock-ish. It was raining that day, and so I had to contend with the rain. But what happened was I rolled up on the main herd, and the main herd was about 19 to 20 strong, and there was a young bull elk in the vicinity. And this is the time of year. This is the rut when I went. It's October, late September, early October is the elk rut, and this guy was moving up behind me. I actually did not hear him, and this is one of the things that it can really literally bite you when you're a wildlife photographer. Is you really need to be situationally aware. You really need to be listening, looking. When you're not staring through your viewfinder, you need to be looking around, observing, because you could find yourself in a tricky spot. It's probably not going to happen, but you could find yourself staring right in the snout of an angry bull elk if you're not careful. Now, chances are it's not going to happen. Don't get all worried about it and fretting about it. But this time of year, during the rut, it can be dangerous. So do keep that in mind when you're going out there. But anyway, this guy snuck up behind me, and it was so funny. I had my 1.4x teleconverter on, and I was shooting the main herd, which was, my word, they were probably a good 100 yards away, and I wasn't getting anything good. Obviously, it was low light. I was tripod mounted, and I was trying to get shots of the main herd, and I just happened to look to my left, and there was a really nice looking, in my mind, a nice looking young elk, really a nice specimen. The rack, or the antlers, had a nice spread, an interesting spread, not a big, huge bull elk like you would see in the main herd, but certainly an interesting subject. And so what I did was I kind of worked my way around down a tree line. I'm actually standing in a tree line for this shot. And I worked my way down around so that I could kind of include some of the fall foliage up in the upper left of the image. I was shooting this with my 150 to 600, which is my go-to lens for just about everything, the Sigma 150 to 600 Contemporary. I love that lens. Can't say enough good things about it. I was actually using my Canon EOS 7D, and I kind of lined him up to the left, a little off center, kind of sort of rule of thirds. I really like his head turn, and one of the things you should understand about deer or elk is when they're walking away from you, they know you're there, right? They saw you there. And what they will do is they'll do a predator check, and they'll actually they'll stop and they'll turn their head in your direction, and they'll actually check to make sure you're not following them or approaching them rapidly, or that, and they're also checking for possible like coyotes or, a bear or something like that that could be behind them. So that's what he's doing here. He's actually stopping. He is kind of checking me out. He's checking out another photographer that was down about 40 yards from me to my right. He's just checking to make sure we're not going to do anything stupid. But he was perfectly comfortable, no pressures, happy that we're there, no problems. And so I took this is actually about an 8-shot burst, or maybe a little less than that, maybe a 7-shot burst, 6-shot burst. And the reason that you want to do that when you're photographing anything, especially this early in the morning, is when you fire a burst, a lot of times the second or third image in that burst are the sharpest images. So if I were to take just one shot, it might be a blurry image, because what happens is when you are photographing, even tripod mounted, what happens is sometimes out of haste or you're not thinking clearly, you actually push the shutter button down too hard. And that kind of jars your camera. And that those first couple images a lot of times will be out of focus. So that's one of the reasons that we, as wildlife photographers, are so interested in the burst. You know, how many images can I shoot before I fill up the buffer? And this is the reason. Things like this. So you might want to shoot a 4 or 5 shot burst, 6 shot burst. And out of that, you know, in this particular instance, out of that burst, I had about maybe 2 images that were perfectly sharp. But I like this one. This is my favorite one of the day. Again, it was shot with my 150 to 600 at only 313 millimeters, f5.6, 1/160th of a second, ISO 1600. So here's a 1600 ISO image with my 7D. So yes, you can do it. Yes, you can zoom into this 100% and you'll see a little bit of noise, but not that much. Not enough to disqualify this image. Certainly doable. It's all about the lighting. It's about exposing to the right. If you don't know what that is, exposing to the right is simply overexposing your image without losing the highlights. And in a shot like this, your highlights are going to be mostly the elk's sides. The elk has a very light tan coat on its side, and if you're not careful, if you expose for the head too much, you will blow out the elk side. And actually, in Lightroom, I did a little bit of retouch here on the side. I actually, not retouch, but I did a little bit of burning in on his side right there, so that you don't have that bright blown out highlight. The grasses, I think, work real well here. The natural field, I think, gives him a very natural environment. Well, it was a natural environment, but it makes you feel like you were there in the wild. It just works. It's not a, this is not a Pulitzer Prize winning image. This is not a contest winning image, but it's a good image, and I'm happy. I'm happy I went, and I'm happy I got it. Okay, let's take a look at the next shot. Okay, this image is a bull elk and one of his calves. Now, this herd, like I said, was about 19 to 20 elk. If you count the young bull that kept following them all day, it was 20. If you don't count him, it was 19. And in this herd were some younger calves. There were a bunch of cows, and there was this bull elk. This is the alpha bull pictured here. He is definitely older. He's probably been an alpha for some time. He's not a particularly aggressive bull, so you can tell he's got some age on him. This was a shot that I took after the rain had ended. It was a little bit later in the day, and I like the shot. It's not my favorite shot, but I like what's going on here. I like that we have a nice forest background, and the forest is darkening into the back. You can just feel the wildness of this image. I like the fact that the calf kind of offsets the power of the elk. What I don't like about the image, I wished, one, that the calf was about 8 feet farther to the left. I wish that his head was up facing me for the shot. But if you've ever photographed elk, you have to be extremely patient. Elk are a lot like cows that you would see out in a field in your neighborhood or in your community. They tend to graze most of the time. When they're not grazing, they're mostly laying down, resting, chewing the cud. So you have to really, really be patient and just hope something cool happens. This guy was, it was rainy that day. They were bedding down a lot, and wasn't a lot of activity, unfortunately. Not a lot of bugling, but you take the positive. You learn from the experience, and you try to get the shot. That's all you're trying to do. All day long, all I'm trying to do is I'm just working the shot. I'm working this herd. I'm standing there for an hour sometimes with them not doing a thing, and you just keep trying to work them, and hopefully they'll do something cool. This shot was, again, with my 150 to 600. I actually used my Canon 1D Mark II. This was one of the last images that my 1D Mark II actually shot. I shot at f6.3, 1/500th of a second, ISO 320. Okay, the next image. This is what most people would consider this next image a no-no. And the reason that they would say that is because you're not supposed to cut the antlers off of an elk. Okay, well, any deer species, really. You're not supposed to crop the antlers out. But in this case, he was very close, first of all. And I wanted to show more character. Okay, I didn't want to just show his antlers. We all get into... I think we get too much into the antlers. I mean, the antlers are very cool, don't get me wrong. But there's more to an elk than his antlers. And I think here we have a close portrait. We can see... Actually, you can see the rain falling in this if you get close enough. But you can see that he's been out in the rain. His coat is heavy and wet. I can see some character in his eyes. I can definitely get a feel for... kind of the character of this elk, if you will. And so I'm not afraid to just get in tight and do this type of photography. Now, again, we're back to the word of caution for the day. This is a rutting bull. This is a very close image. She was probably maybe 15 yards away. But I was in my car. I'd actually retreated. Most of the time that day I was on foot. But I'd actually retreated back to my car because it was raining. And lo and behold, this herd just kind of moved up on me. And, it's okay. If they move toward you, stay in your car, photograph them, feel comfortable. He wasn't mad at me. I wasn't mad at him. We're happy. If I was out on foot and I was this close, I would be a little bit nervous. Because if one does decide to charge you, you are not going to be fast enough to get out of his way. You're just not going to be. I don't care if you're an Olympic runner. These guys can run. They're unpredictable, and they can do an extreme amount of damage. There have been bull elk that have actually attacked cars, attacked fences. You don't want to be near these guys. They have mauled photographers before. Even if they approach me, I generally will put a buffer. I try to get back. Try to keep it about 40, 50 yards. Try to get some kind of buffer in there. Do what you're comfortable with, but just be careful. But anyway, so this shot was just for more impact, more storytelling. We're trying to tell a story. When I go out to a place like this, I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to think about a photo essay and what that might look like. This was shot with my 1D Mark II, my Canon, or actually my Sigma 150 to 600 at 200 millimeters, f6.3, 1/320th of a second at ISO 400. One more thing to note here. When I am in my vehicle, I am always using my Grizzly beanbag. And that is just a beanbag support that rests on your door or your window and allows you to comfortably rest your camera on your door without banging up your door or banging up your camera or ruining your lens, God forbid. So, look for opportunities like this. Look for the close-up images because they help tell your story. And don't get creeped out, or not creeped out, but don't get angry at yourself for cropping off the antlers. It's okay sometimes. It's okay. Don't panic. Okay, the next image. I would have loved this image. This is another bull elk. It's a vertical. I would have loved this image if I had shot it horizontally. Unfortunately, I was in a vertical composition mode at this point, and he happened to look up, and I fired off a burst of 4 or 5 shots. I feel like shots like this, a lot of times, it's really hard to pull this shot off with a large animal like this, and what ends up happening is it looks like he's cut in half. It looks like somebody took a saw and cut him in half, and that's not desirable. Okay, if you are going to do a vertical of a bull, it should probably be kind of coming directly at you, and you can include his whole body and everything. I like that shot much, much more. But hey, I put it out here to show you guys kind of what not to do, or what I feel like doesn't work. I mean, you may love it. I don't know. You may think this is great. That's fine. But I thought it was a good example of a perfect shot in the sense that I got all his antlers in. I've got him looking up, but I kind of missed it. So this was shot with my 1D Mark II, the Sigma 150-600 f6.3 at 313 millimeters, 1/1000th of a second at ISO 320. By the way, ISO 320 generally is a really good ISO in most cameras. I have found it to actually be better, quite a bit better than ISO 400 in many cases. There's a lot of people online that speculate that, with certain cameras, that ISO 320 is actually the native ISO versus the 400 is actually a manipulation of the exposure. I don't know. I'm not going to get into all the technical. I'll just say that it does look better a lot of times. But it kind of should, right? Because it is actually a lower ISO. Okay, what not to do was this shot. Okay, next image. This image, I like it. I'm not in love with it, but I think it has some merit. It certainly helps tell the story. I think you have a lone calf here. This is simply entitled Elk Calf. You have a lone calf. How do you frame an elk calf in its environment? I tried to use a rule of thirds here because I didn't have a whole lot going on, not a lot of action. But I'm trying to tell the story of this herd. And the herd did have several, I think it had about 3 calves in it at various ages. And the interesting thing about this to me is this kind of sort of, I don't want to say for sure, but it kind of sort of tells the story of how the calves get eaten, basically. So I don't know if you've ever seen this happen before. I've never seen it in the wild, but I've seen documentaries on this, and what happens is the calves will actually get separated, or they'll actually kind of lag behind a lot of times. And the coyotes know this. And what they will do is they will try to... Coyotes got their name being wily. The old Wile E. Coyote from the cartoon. Well, that's actually has some truth to it. What they will do is they will lead the young calf away from the herd, and they'll kind of play with it, like they're being playful, like they want to play. And the farther that calf gets away, and pretty soon, mom's not watching, and they take it down. And I've seen this, and it's a terrible thing to watch, but actually, the cows a lot of times will actually end up winning that fight because the cow has some very unique fighting skills for dealing with predators. One of the things that they will actually do is they will actually try to get the wolf or the coyote to follow them into water, because when a cow gets in the water, it's much more capable of defending itself. They will actually oftentimes win. They'll actually tire the coyote out, and they'll actually win the fight. So it's kind of interesting, and this kind of helps support that feeling, I think. Okay, this was shot with my 1D Mark II. It was shot with my 150 to 600 again. Everything was shot with my 150 to 600. I'm going to stop saying that now. Everything in this set was shot with that lens. It was shot at 468 millimeters, 1/320th of a second, ISO 640. Okay, next image. Okay, this is the bull elk again, the alpha bull elk, and in this image you can see actually some behavior, and I actually like this shot. Unfortunately, you can see the Cataloochee church. I think that was the Cataloochee church. It might have been. No, this is one of the houses. You can see in the background there. So it kind of, I don't know. I don't like that aspect. But what you're seeing here is this elk is actually smelling or sniffing the air to determine if there are any cows in estrus, if there are any cows that are ready to mate. And you will see them tilt their head back like this and kind of smell the air. And the other thing they'll do oftentimes when they tilt their head back like that, you'll hear them bugle. This guy did not bugle in this particular instance, but it's kind of an interesting thing to watch. And the sound of the bugle is a very interesting thing. It's like nothing you've ever heard, and it's shocking to actually see an animal that big create such a high-pitched whistle. It's very interesting. This guy, again, he was kind of sedate for that time of year. I think mostly the rain and his age were catching up with him. You can see in this picture also, if you look carefully, on his, I guess the back antler here, you can see where he has lost one of his tines on his antler, most likely from fighting another bull who was trying to take over the herd. So this really helps tell the story. Again, behavior. You're looking for behavior in your shots. And I know this is not going to win any competitions, guys, but you're looking for that behavior. This was shot at 150 millimeters, so he was actually getting quite close to me here. ISO 320, 1/1000th of a second, f6.3. By the way, when you get up around the 1/1000th of a second, you can shoot handheld with a shot like this pretty easily, very easily actually. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm actually no longer using a tripod at this point in the day. I'm actually using just holding the lens. So with image stabilization on. Actually, in this case, I may have actually had image stabilization turned off. Okay, next image. All right, here again, we're telling a story. When you're telling a story, it's important. When you're thinking about photo essays, it's important to step back and get a wide shot. Sometimes we call this an establishing shot. Sometimes we call this an environmental photograph that's showing the elk in their environment. I look at this as an establishing shot. We know that we're in a wild area. We can see that. We can see the trees. We can see this massive field. We can see the bull elk to the right. We can see his cows bedded down close to one another for protection, for body heat. We can even tell that one or two of these is a calf if we look closely. But this supports the story. I always look to do this when I can. I've got my 150 to 600 pulled back to 184 millimeters, f6.3, 1/320th of a second at ISO 500. I did shoot this handheld. I take that back. This was tripod mounted. And with this particular lens, you don't want to use vibration compensation or optical stabilization with this kind of image. So, all right, next image. Oh, that's it. that's it for the next image. If you keep looking through those images, you'll see other images from Cataloochee. That was from my trip earlier in the year, where I mostly photographed cows. So, but that's pretty much it for Cataloochee. Cataloochee, it's not, don't expect it to be Yellowstone. It's not Yellowstone, but it is a great place to go if you're in North Carolina. If you're visiting, especially if you're visiting the Cades Cove area, you could take a short trip. Or if you're in Cherokee gambling, you can make a short trip east of there, and you will be right there at Cataloochee. Also worth mentioning, if you're in that area, Cherokee, I am told, I have not actually seen this, but I was told while I was there that there are elk that hang out at the visitor center in Cherokee, and that could be a good opportunity for close shots, portraits, that type of thing. So definitely get out there and give it a try. It looks like a good opportunity in Cherokee. So I'm not gonna have a know your subject segment in this episode, simply because this whole episode has been about the elk and how to photograph the elk. I would say that, please continue to support the podcast, and, if you can do it monetarily, great. If you can't, I'm cool with that. But I would ask that you please go out to iTunes and rate the podcast, click the subscribe button. Let me know what you think. Let me know what kind of topics you want to see. Also, please get the word out. Spreading the word through social media is probably one of the best things that you can do. You can check out my website. Check out all the free information out there. There's I put out fairly often. I put an article out there. I blog regularly, so check that out. Check out my YouTube site again. I got just a quick video out there on my trip to Cataloochee to kind of support this whole podcast release. I'm sorry it's not super professional quality. I'm not a videographer, and I just wanted to throw something together to show people Cataloochee. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye.